We all love a good movie that we can watch over and over and over again, regardless of how long it might be. Sometimes, the longer the movie, the better. With today's technology, the graphics and sound effects are so realistic that they have set the standards very high for films. But all that had to have a beginning from somewhere, somehow. In this presentation, I hope to take you on a short field trip back in time and show you how one of America's favorite pastimes got started and reflects the time period in which it took place. At the turn of the 20th century, movies were the new and upcoming attractions. And yeah, perhaps in today's world, it might not be what exactly we're expecting to see at the movie theaters today. But back then, they were all the rage. Especially since the labor laws of the early 1900s had changed, giving some people a little bit more freedom and extra time. Although the first motion picture had already been invented right before the turn of the century, the film society was still in its infancy, but would quickly bloom into an industry that we are more familiar with today. We've all heard of the term motion pictures. Well, that comes from the literal concept of rapidly moving still framed pictures to create the appearance of motion. The very first cameras were hand cranked operated, and although the cameramen were very well trained to keep a consistent motion, you can't help but notice the unhuman-like capturing of movement, kind of like what we see in horror movies today. At the start of the 1900s, filmmakers were entering a second phase of this film movement. They had gone from films with no plot that only lasted 15 to 30 seconds to a well-rehearsed film that provided a storyline and multiple scenes so the audience could enjoy for an average of about 10 minutes per film. These short films were called one-reelers, and that's because the movie was shot in one reel of film. And at that time, many of these films were produced by small companies in and around the upper eastern cities around New York City. Here is an example of one of the cameras used. As you can see, they aren't very compact. This camera was capable of producing a film of up to 10 minutes long. Although the films had no sound, they didn't lack imagination. And remember, this was a completely new concept for many Americans. Since there was no sound, the films would provide a brief description of the storyline prior to the scene. This would allow the audience to become involved with the film as well and lead to an excitement for the scene to follow, similar to this background. So, where would you go see them? This is actually an interesting fact, because the venues where these movies could be seen was called a Nickelodeon. And many of you guys remember growing up watching the Nickelodeon channel. Well, this is where the name comes from. This was a designated theater room where you could watch the latest films, and as the name suggests, it only costs a nickel to get in. Some venues even had live music to play along with the movie, similar to what you would see at a show on Broadway. One of the first films to provide a storyline was a 1903 film by Edwin Porter called The Great Train Robbery, where a gang of robbers gets onto this train and robs everybody, but is eventually caught and confronted by the authorities. This was a favorite amongst the public due to its action-packed, intense fighting scenes. Well, for back then at least. And it also had one of the very first shootouts portrayed in a movie. The ending to this movie was thought to be an exhilarating experience. At the end, one of the robbers sits facing the camera, raises his pistol, and shoots the audience. The crowd loved that scene, and it has since been reenacted by several other producers. Another great movie was one that we all might have heard of, and I bet you probably didn't even know that was created over 100 years ago. Alice in Wonderland, filmed in 1903. And as you can tell, it was far from today's definition of high definition. If you think the cartoon we grew up watching was weird, imagine this movie played out in person, with no music, no sound, and all within 8 minutes. So as you can see, these movies were short, jittery, and not the best quality. But by the end of the decade, advances in technology were able to provide us with longer, better quality films. One of the directors who was able to take advantage of the growing film industry produced hundreds of films between 1908 and 1912. He was able to produce up to 2 one-reelers a week. His name was David Wark Griffith. A popular film of his was called The Lone-Dell Operator, where a train station telegraph operator is robbed by some thieves, but she's able to get on the telegraph machine and send a distress message out to the next train station. Where they receive it, they arm themselves and fire up their train and rush to the damsel in distress and save her just in time. This film was a whopping 16 minutes, and even though there's no audio to it, the storyline is clear as day. Griffith and other producers wanted to expand their wings and let their imaginations run wild, but many owners of the production companies thought to keep things simple and short. So much so that they never even named the actors in their films for fear of the actor attaining fame and eventually wanting a higher pay. Griffith, along with several others, decided it was time to go and create their masterpieces elsewhere. Griffith and some of the other film producers packed up and left the East for a place with vast open fields, great weather, and far less rain. Some place with great potential for outdoor filming. Griffith and the others headed to none other than Los Angeles. In 1914, Griffith is able to create one of the greatest films of his career. This was also the #1 full-length movie of its time. You could say it was a blockbuster. The film was called The Birth of a Nation. Although this was seen as a very controversial film, it was truly a masterpiece, with a production cost of over $100,000. It had multiple scenarios throughout the film and an enormous cast and extras. The amount of work put into this film was truly amazing, and the $18 million in revenue it generated in its time was unheard of. This was the magic of the West. Soon, the people would come to recognize some of their more popular actors by name, and instead of keeping them from fame, the production companies encouraged it, as it would work to their advantage as well. The fame these actors gained meant more people would come see their favorite celebrities in their newest movie, which in return meant guaranteed income for the film producers. The film industry would only bloom from this point forward, attracting people from all over the country to see the latest movies and their favorite celebrities. This would become the beginning of the iconic entertainment capital of the world, Hollywood.